The moment her heel connected with the maid's back, 300 wedding guests went silent. One shove could cost a woman her job, her home, and her daughter's future. But nobody could explain why the fiancé had been watching that maid all night like she was a threat, not a servant. The maid didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just knelt in the wreckage of the cake and looked up at the man she'd worked for. And when the billionaire finally spoke, it wasn't to the maid at all. It was 4 words that made his fiancée's face turn white. Welcome back, everyone, to another story about the quiet moments that change everything. If you love stories about dignity, truth, and the kind of justice that sneaks up on you slowly, you're going to want to stay for this one. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments. And if you haven't yet, subscribe because we've got a lot more stories like this one coming. Grace Bennett had worked in big houses before, but nothing like the Whitfield estate. The house sat behind iron gates on 11 acres outside Charleston, the kind of property that had its own name, Millbrook, carved into a stone sign at the entrance. Grace had been hired 6 months earlier as a housemaid, mostly handling the West Wing, where Nathaniel Whitfield kept his private study and guest suites. She was 27, quiet, careful with her words, and good at her job. She had a 3-year-old daughter named Ivy waiting for her every evening at her sister's apartment in town, and that was reason enough to never be late, never complain, and never make waves. Nathaniel Whitfield was 36, the CEO of a shipping and logistics company his grandfather had started, and by most accounts a fair man to work for. He wasn't cruel to staff. He remembered names. He said thank you when someone refilled his coffee. Grace had noticed this within her first week, the difference between a boss who saw the people around him and one who didn't. His fiancée was a different story. Vanessa Cole had moved into Millbrook 4 months before Grace was hired, and by the time Grace arrived, the household staff had already developed a quiet, unspoken system for managing her. Don't leave a task half-finished where she can see it. Don't speak unless spoken to in front of guests. Never, under any circumstances, be caught touching anything in her closet, even to organize it. Grace learned the rules fast. What she couldn't quite figure out was why Vanessa seemed to watch her more than she watched the other staff. Started small. A missing bracelet that turned up 2 days later in a drawer Vanessa swore she'd already checked. A comment, dropped lightly over dinner while Grace was clearing plates, about how some people just have a way of making themselves indispensable, don't they, Nathaniel? A long, assessing look whenever Grace walked into a room where Nathaniel was already sitting. Grace told herself it was nothing. Rich people were particular. She'd worked for worse. Then came the birthday. Nathaniel's mother, Eleanor Whitfield, was turning 80, and the family had planned a gala at the estate. 300 guests, a live quartet, a 6-tier cake from the best bakery in Charleston. Grace had been assigned to help with the event staff for the evening, mostly running trays and managing the dessert table, since the household knew the layout better than the caterers did. She'd been nervous about it all week, not because of the work, but because of Vanessa. Ever since the engagement had been announced, Vanessa had been sharper, more brittle, especially around Eleanor, who had never fully warmed to her future daughter-in-law. Grace had overheard just enough, a hallway argument here, a clipped phone call there, to sense that something in the relationship between Vanessa and Eleanor was fraying badly, and that Vanessa blamed everyone around her for it, including somehow the household staff. The night of the party, Grace kept her head down and did her job. She refilled champagne, guided servers toward the kitchen, made sure the cake table stayed pristine under the chandelier light. Eleanor looked radiant in dark blue, holding court near the fireplace, and Nathaniel stood close to her most of the night, proud and attentive, occasionally scanning the room the way people do when they're checking that everything is going according to plan. It was during the toast that things started to go wrong. Eleanor stood to say a few words, thanking her son, thanking her late husband's memory, thanking the friends who'd known her for decades. Vanessa stood beside Nathaniel, glass raised, smiling the practiced smile she wore for cameras. But Grace, positioned near the dessert table, saw something the rest of the room didn't. Vanessa's eyes weren't on Eleanor. They were on Nathaniel, and they were unhappy. After the toast, as the quartet started playing again and guests drifted toward the cake table for the cutting, Grace bent down to straighten the linen skirting beneath it, adjusting a fold that had come loose. She didn't hear Vanessa approach. She only felt the sudden sharp shove against her shoulder. Not an accident, not a stumble, but a deliberate push that sent her stumbling forward, straight into the 6-tier cake, her arms flailing, frosting and cake and candles collapsing around her as 300 guests turned to look. For one full second, the entire ballroom went silent except for the string quartet, which faltered and stopped. Grace knelt there in the wreckage, frosting on her hands, on her uniform, in her hair, and looked up, not at Vanessa but at Nathaniel, whose face had gone rigid with something between shock and disbelief. "Oh my God," Vanessa said, pressing a hand to her chest, voice pitched perfectly for the room. She tripped right into it. "Is she all right?" It wasn't a question for Grace. Grace opened her mouth for everyone else, then closed it again. She thought of Ivy. She thought of her job, her rent, the 6 months of careful, quiet work she'd put into keeping this position. She said nothing. But Eleanor Whitfield, standing 3 feet away with a champagne glass still in her hand, had seen exactly what happened. And so had someone else, a guest near the edge of the room, phone raised, who had been recording the toast and had caught the whole thing, cake and shove and all, in the background of his video. Nathaniel crossed the room in 4 long strides, knelt down in front of Grace without hesitating, and asked if she was hurt. Not Vanessa. Grace. It was the first time all night his fiancée's face lost its composure. The party didn't end so much as it dissolved. Eleanor insisted, in the calm, immovable voice of a woman who had run boardrooms before most of the guests were born, that the cake was replaceable and the evening would continue, but that Grace needed to be looked after first. She personally walked Grace to the kitchen, waved off 2 other staff members trying to help, and got her a clean towel and a chair. "Sit," Eleanor said. "You're not going anywhere until someone checks that you're not hurt." Grace sat, cheeks burning, humiliation settling into her chest like a stone. "I'm fine, ma'am." "Really? I should get back to work." "You should get back to work when I say you should get back to work," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "This is my house tonight, and I decide who's fine and who isn't." Out in the ballroom, Nathaniel was having a different conversation. "She fell into the cake, Nathaniel," Vanessa was saying, her voice low and urgent now that the guests had mostly turned their attention back to the band. "It was an accident. Why are you looking at me like that?" "I saw you push her," Nathaniel said. "You saw me standing near her when she tripped." "I didn't push anyone." Vanessa's hand found his arm, soft, pleading. "Baby, I would never. You know how clumsy the household staff can get when they're rushing around like that." It was a small thing, that word, clumsy, dismissive in a way that made Nathaniel's jaw tighten, though he couldn't have said exactly why. He'd trusted Vanessa for the better part of a year. She was charming with his business partners, warm with his friends, endlessly patient, or so it had always seemed, with the pressures of merging her life into his. He wanted to believe her. But he'd seen her arm move. He'd seen the exact moment of contact. "I need some air," he said, and walked away before she could respond. He found Grace in the kitchen, sitting with his mother, a towel pressed to a small cut on her forearm where she'd caught the edge of the cake stand on the way down. She looked up when he entered, and something in her expression, careful, guarded, bracing for consequences that hadn't come yet, made his chest tighten with something close to guilt, though he'd done nothing wrong. "I'm sorry about your mother's cake," Grace said quietly. "I'll pay for a replacement." "You will not," Eleanor said sharply. "You didn't do anything, dear." You were pushed. Mrs. Whitfield. I have eyes, Grace. I've had them for 80 years, and they still work fine. Eleanor turned to her son. Nathaniel, I want you to understand something. That woman put her hand on this girl's shoulder and shoved her forward on purpose. I was standing 3 feet away. I watched it happen. Nathaniel's throat felt tight. Mom, I'm not finished. I don't know what's going on with Vanessa, and frankly, I've had my concerns for months, but this is not a matter of opinion. This happened. I saw it, and unless I'm mistaken, so did half the room. Grace shifted uncomfortably, caught between 2 members of the family she worked for, acutely aware that whatever she said next could either protect her or end her employment. I don't want any trouble, she said carefully. I just want to go home to my daughter. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression at that. A flicker of something almost tender, quickly smoothed over into professional concern. Take the rest of the night off. Paid, obviously. I'll have someone drive you home. That's not necessary. It is, he said, in a tone that didn't invite argument. As Grace gathered her things, Eleanor pulled her son aside. There's something else you should know, she said quietly. This isn't the first time I've noticed Vanessa's behavior toward that girl. Little things. Comments. The way she watches her when she thinks no one's paying attention. I've been asking myself for weeks why a woman who is about to marry into more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes would waste a single second being threatened by a housemaid. Nathaniel frowned. Threatened. That's a strong word. It's the right word, Eleanor said. I just haven't figured out why yet. But I intend to. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house had gone quiet, Nathaniel sat alone in his study with his laptop open and a message from an unknown number sitting in his inbox, forwarded from an assistant who'd fielded it through the general contact line at his company. You should look more closely at the woman you're marrying. Ask her about Brentwood. Friend. He stared at it for a long time before closing the laptop without responding. The video surfaced 2 days later. It hadn't been posted publicly. The guest who filmed it, an old friend of Eleanor's from her book club, had simply sent it to Eleanor directly, apologizing for filming during the toast and asking if she wanted it deleted. Eleanor did not want it deleted. She watched it 11 times, then called her son and told him to come to her house immediately. The footage was clear enough. It showed the toast, then the crowd shifting toward the cake table, and in the corner of the frame, Vanessa's arm extending, flat palm against Grace's shoulder blade, a firm, deliberate shove, followed by Grace's stumble into the cake and Vanessa's hand flying to her own chest in practiced alarm half a second later. Nathaniel watched it in silence on his mother's living room television. His face unreadable. I need to talk to her, he said finally. You need to talk to Grace too, Eleanor said. You need to ask her if this is the first time. That evening, Nathaniel found Grace finishing her shift in the West Wing, folding towels in the linen closet with the careful precision of someone trying to keep her hands busy. He asked if he could speak with her for a moment, and she straightened immediately, wary. Am I being let go? No. God, no. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. I saw the video from the party. My mother's friend filmed it. I know what Vanessa did wasn't an accident. Grace's shoulders dropped, just slightly, the tension of the last 2 days finally loosening. I didn't want to cause problems, she admitted. I need this job. You're not going to lose your job over something that isn't your fault. He hesitated. Has this happened before? Not physically. But has she done other things? Made things difficult for you specifically? Grace considered how much to say. She thought about the missing bracelet that had mysteriously reappeared. The comments dropped like small stones into still water. The sense she'd had for months of being watched, measured, resented for reasons she couldn't name. There have been some things, she said carefully. Small things. I didn't think they meant much. What kind of things? She's accused me twice of taking items that later turned up somewhere else. She's made comments to other staff about my work that weren't accurate. Nothing I could prove was deliberate. Until the party. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. I got a message 2 nights ago. Anonymous. It said I should ask Vanessa about somewhere called Brentwood. Grace's expression flickered. Barely, but enough that Nathaniel caught it. You know something, he said. I don't know anything for certain, Grace said slowly. But my sister used to work as a nanny in a neighborhood called Brentwood Heights, about 3 years ago before I started here. She mentioned once, just once in passing, that she'd worked for a family whose daughter had gotten engaged to someone very wealthy, and that the daughter had gotten a previous housekeeper fired by accusing her of theft. My sister said the housekeeper swore up and down she hadn't taken anything, and everyone believed the daughter because of who her family was. Did your sister ever say the daughter's name? Grace hesitated. I don't remember for certain. Might have been Vanessa. I'm not saying it was. I don't want to accuse anyone of anything I can't prove. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. I need to talk to your sister. She won't want to get involved. I understand that. But if there's a pattern here, if Vanessa has done this before to someone else, I need to know. Grace studied him for a long moment, weighing the risk of pulling her sister, and by extension herself, further into the middle of the Whitfield family's private crisis. But she thought of the shove at the party, the deliberate cruelty of it in front of 300 people, and the anonymous message that had arrived within 48 hours as if someone else had been watching Vanessa for a long time, waiting for the right moment to speak up. I'll ask her, Grace said. I can't promise she'll talk to you. That night, back at her sister's apartment, Grace sat across the kitchen table from Renee and asked her, as gently as she could, to tell her everything she remembered about the family in Brentwood Heights. Renee's face went pale before Grace had even finished the question. Why are you asking me about the Coles? Grace's stomach dropped. The Coles. Vanessa Cole, Renee said. I worked for her parents for 8 months. I got fired because Vanessa told her mother I'd stolen a necklace. I never took anything. I couldn't prove it, and nobody believed me over her. Renee's hands trembled slightly around her coffee mug. Why, Grace? What does this have to do with you? Grace closed her eyes. Because I think she's about to do the exact same thing to me. Nathaniel didn't confront Vanessa immediately. He'd learned enough in business to know that a confrontation without evidence was just an accusation, easily denied, easily turned around. Instead, he did what he did best. He investigated quietly, methodically, the way he'd untangle a supply chain problem or a contract dispute. He hired a private investigator discreetly, through his company's legal counsel rather than his personal accounts, and asked for a background check on Vanessa Cole that went further back than the surface-level vetting his family's lawyers had done before the engagement. What came back 3 days later was more than he'd expected. There had been 2 prior incidents matching the pattern Renee described. Household staff accused of theft or misconduct in homes where Vanessa Cole had been living, both resulting in the staff member's termination, both never substantiated by any actual evidence, both occurring shortly after the staff member had, in some way, drawn attention or approval from a man Vanessa was involved with at the time. In one case, a doorman at her parents' building. In another, a driver for a family friend. The pattern wasn't about theft at all. It was about control, about eliminating anyone Vanessa perceived as a threat to her position, no matter how unlikely that threat actually was. Nathaniel sat with the report for a long time before he brought it to his mother. Eleanor read it in silence, then set it down on the coffee table with the careful precision of someone handling something fragile. She's done this before. Twice that we can prove. Maybe more that we can't. What are you going to do? Nathaniel exhaled slowly. I'm going to give her a chance to tell me the truth herself. If she can't do that, then I'll know everything I need to know. He didn't tell Vanessa about the investigation. Instead, over dinner 2 nights later, He brought up the party as casually as he could manage. "I've been thinking about what happened with Grace," he said. "I watched the video from the party again." Something in Vanessa's face tightened, though her voice stayed light. "I told you it was an accident. Why do you keep bringing this up?" "Because I don't think it was an accident. And I don't think it's the first time you've had a problem like this with someone who works for people close to you." Vanessa's fork stilled against her plate. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I know about Brentwood Heights. I know about the housekeeper you had fired for a theft that was never proven. I know about the driver before that." Nathaniel kept his voice level, though his chest felt tight with a kind of grief he hadn't expected. Grief for the year he'd spent believing in someone who, it turned out, he'd never really known at all. "I want to hear it from you. Tell me the truth, Vanessa. Right now." For a long moment Vanessa said nothing, her carefully composed face cycling through something like panic before settling into something colder, harder. "You don't understand what it's like," she said finally, her voice low and sharp. "Do you know what it's like to watch every woman who walks into a room with you? To watch the way men look at people like her, sweet, humble, hardworking, and wonder if that's what they actually want instead of someone like me? I've spent my whole life being told I have to be perfect to be worth keeping. I wasn't going to lose you to a maid. I never gave you a single reason to think you were losing me to anyone," Nathaniel said quietly. "I gave you a year of my life, Vanessa. I trusted you around my mother, my staff, my home. And this whole time you were terrorizing people because of something that existed entirely in your own head." "Don't act so noble," Vanessa snapped, standing abruptly from the table. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I know you shoved a woman into a cake in front of 300 people because you were jealous of the way I trusted her judgment on party logistics. I know you got 2 other people fired from jobs they needed for accusations that were never true. I don't need to understand your reasoning, Vanessa. I just needed to know it was real. And now I do." Vanessa's eyes filled with something between fury and desperation. "If you do anything with this, if you say a word to anyone, I will make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what kind of family the Whitfields really are." "You can try," Nathaniel said, standing as well, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "But I have a video of you assaulting a member of my household staff at my mother's 80th birthday party. A documented pattern of similar behavior going back years, and a signed prenuptial agreement that accounts for exactly this kind of conduct. I'd think very carefully before you threaten me." Vanessa stared at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, Nathaniel watched the mask fall away entirely, revealing something raw and ugly underneath that made him wonder how he'd missed it for so long. "Get out of my house," he said quietly. "Tonight." The engagement ended that night, quietly, without a scene, though word moved through Charleston's social circles within a week regardless. The kind of story that travels on its own momentum once enough people have pieced together enough fragments. Vanessa didn't fight the breakup publicly. Whatever calculations she made privately, she seemed to understand that a public battle against a family with resources like the Whitfields, backed by video evidence and a documented pattern of behavior, would only end badly for her. She left Millbrook that night with 2 suitcases and did not return. Grace found out about the broken engagement 3 days later from Eleanor, who came to find her in the kitchen with an expression Grace hadn't seen from her before. Something softer, almost grateful. "I wanted to tell you myself," Eleanor said. "Vanessa is no longer part of this family, and no longer part of this house. What she did to you, and to your sister's former employer, and to at least one other person we're aware of, will not happen again under this roof." Grace didn't know what to say. Relief and disbelief tangled together in her chest. "I'm glad," she managed. "I'm sorry it took all this." "You don't need to apologize for anything," Eleanor said firmly. You did the hardest thing anyone can do in your position. You told the truth even when it would have been easier not to. Nathaniel found her later that afternoon, in the garden behind the West Wing, where Grace sometimes went during her breaks to watch Ivy play on the rare afternoons her sister brought her by. He watched for a moment before approaching. Grace crouched low, laughing as her daughter chased a butterfly across the grass, an entirely different woman than the composed, careful housemaid he'd come to know inside the walls of Millbrook. "I owe you an apology," he said when she noticed him. "It shouldn't have taken all of this for me to see what was happening under my own roof." "You didn't do anything wrong," Grace said, standing, brushing grass from her uniform. "I trusted someone who hurt people I was responsible for. That's on me." He glanced toward Ivy, who had abandoned the butterfly to stare up at him with wide, curious eyes. "She's beautiful. She keeps me honest," Grace said, a small smile finally breaking through. "Kids notice things adults miss. She kept asking me why the lady in the purple dress looked at me like she wanted me gone. I didn't have a good answer for her." Nathaniel's jaw tightened briefly at that, though he said nothing about it. Instead he said, "I'd like to do something for you if you'll let me. Not charity. Compensation for what you went through, and for what your sister went through years ago because of the same person." Grace hesitated. "I know you don't need it," he said gently. "But you've earned it. Both of you." What followed over the next several weeks was not a dramatic reversal of fortune so much as a quiet, deliberate correction. Nathaniel funded a scholarship account for Ivy's education, arranged for Renee to receive a formal letter clearing her name with any future employer who called for a reference, and offered Grace a promotion to house manager, overseeing the West Wing staff directly, with a salary that finally matched the dignity she'd carried through 6 months of quiet mistreatment. Grace accepted the promotion, though she made clear, in the careful, steady way that had defined her from the beginning, that she wasn't interested in being anyone's redemption story. She wanted to do her job well, raise her daughter, and move forward without the shadow of Vanessa Cole hanging over Millbrook. Eleanor's 80th birthday was eventually celebrated again, 3 weeks later, in a smaller gathering with a new cake, the same chandelier light, and none of the tension that had haunted the house for the past several months. Grace helped set the dessert table, and this time, when she straightened the linen skirting, no one shoved her into anything. Near the end of the evening, Eleanor found her near the kitchen and pressed something small into her hand. A card, handwritten, simple. "Thank you for your courage. Mattered more than you know." Grace tucked it into her apron pocket and went back to work, steady, unbothered, exactly the way she'd carried herself through everything that came before. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be seen. Grace never asked for that. She just did the work in front of her, told the truth when it counted, and let the people who mattered figure out the rest on their own time. Turned out that was enough. If you were in Grace's position, humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, would you have spoken up right away or waited like she did? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you, hit subscribe because we've got another one waiting for you right now.